Thank you all for coming. If you've noticed, there's no longer any wind. We took care of that this morning, at least in the Sepsis City Hall. We are joined by a number of very distinguished elected officials, a lot of public officials. I'm really glad to be here. Some of the best progressive elected officials in the city. We have Congresswoman Yvette Clarke. We have Congressman Charles Rangel. We have my Congressman Jerry Nadler. We have the public advocate Letitia James. Borough President Gail Brewer. We have some elected officials from the state who have contributed so much to the discussion about ballot access. We have somebody who I've worked with on this issue for many years, Senator Mike Gianaris, who is the leader on same-day voter registration, automatic voter registration, and I want to recognize him. Liz Krueger has been a leader, especially on the issue of voting by mail, and we should give her a round of applause. Assemblyman Brian Kavanaugh, I think, has introduced every bill in the Assembly related to these issues. Let's give him a round of applause. Assemblywoman Seawright is here. Assemblywoman Rosick is here. Assemblywoman Joanne Simon is here. Assemblyman Weprin, leader on absentee ballots, is here. Councilmember Mark Traeger is here. Councilmember Liz Crowley. Councilmember Ben Kalos. And, of course, my Senator Hoylman, is here with his assistant. So let's give them a big round of applause for being here. We are also joined by so many community-based organizations, and we're going to announce them as well. But we're here today because turnout in New York State, voter turnout in New York State, and New York City in particular, is among the worst in the nation. With the presidential primary in a few short weeks and state and federal elections this November, there is no better time now to shine a light on this critical issue. Let's start with the facts. In the most recent presidential election, only 58% of registered voters in New York City cast a ballot. And worse, in the 2014 midterm, only 1 in 4 showed up to the polls. That is the lowest turnout rate on record for our city. New York State ranks 48th out of 50 states for voter turnout, and that is a disgrace. But there's a reason why voter turnout is so low. It's because our voting laws make it harder, not easier, for our expanding electorate to vote. It's an outrage that New York is not one of the 10 states that provide same-day voter registration, or one of the 20 states that offer online voter registration, or one of the 27 states where people can vote absentee with no excuse, or one of the 33 states where they can vote early. It's time for us to catch up and break down the barriers to voting. It begins with registering more voters. We can and should make pre-registration automatic for 16 and 17-year-olds so that by the time they're 18, they're ready to vote on Election Day. And it should be easy for every eligible New Yorker to register to vote. That's why, when I was in the Assembly, I sponsored legislation to enact same-day voter registration, the bill that Senator Gianaris continues to sponsor today. And it's why we support bills to bring automatic registration to New York State, because not everyone has access to the internet to request a voter registration form, and we know New Yorkers who have visited the DMV, we also know not everyone has a car, so they don't go to the DMV. We cannot leave all of our people out of this process. But registration is only the first hurdle, because even once you're registered, it's not easy to cast your ballot. We need to implement early voting and no excuse absentee balloting. New York polls are open for only 15 hours in one day only. There's no alternative for New Yorkers who work long hours or care for a loved one. That's just wrong. A work schedule or a family obligation should never prevent you from making your voice heard. Voting before Election Day works in other states, and it can work here too. But it's not enough just to expand when you can vote. We also have to expand how and where you can vote. Our poll sites and our ballots need to be accessible for every New Yorker, no matter their native language or physical ability. We need to use technology at our fingertips to expand language access at the polls and ensure that every single voting site in New York City meets ADA standards. And finally, we need to streamline our voting process and make the administration of our elections more efficient. I just want people to understand what we're looking at this year alone. We have a presidential primary on April 19th. A congressional primary in June, a state primary in September, and a general presidential election in November. Now, we love participatory democracy in voting, but if we could just simply consolidate the state and the federal election on one day, we would save $50 million on this election cycle. So it is absolutely outrageous that we are sending people to the polls when we could actually just consolidate and pay more attention to that primary. So here's the bottom line. We know that states across this country are making it harder and harder for people to participate in elections. They're eliminating early voting. They're removing polling sites in certain neighborhoods and on college campuses. And they're raising barriers for people, whether you have criminal records or you happen to come from a certain place. People in this country and other states are being denied the right to vote. I believe, and I think the people here today in this huge coalition believe, New York City should lead the way. The provision of the Voting Rights Act that protected our fundamental right to vote was struck down by the Supreme Court in 2013. So we're moving in the wrong direction. New York does not stand for discrimination by age, race, or gender. We've got to reverse this disenfranchisement, and the strongest way to do that is what we're doing here today. This coalition of organizations and elected officials are now taking a stand collaboratively and collectively, and we're putting together our resources to shake up this system and get people to the polls. So finally, don't believe the hype just because everybody is telling you that the Hillary Sanders race or Trump is going to make everybody vote. It doesn't happen on its own. It happens when we make it easier for people to vote. Thank you very much, and it's great to have everybody here.